welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits YouTube page. As always, I'm Christian Skudovic, joined here with Robert Skudovic. Today we're going to be talking about the most overrated players in the NFL as far as fantasy goes. Now, one of the ways that we went to do this is evaluating players based on their ADP, or average draft position. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that before we get started, but kind of as that always, like a player might be talented, but he might not be worth a first-round pick, sort of.
Yeah. Before I get into my first player, this is really important if you're going to have an effective draft, and of course, as we know, having an effective draft is a huge step in winning your championship. What makes a player a good pick is not necessarily the numbers he has, but ultimately where you took him in the draft. Was he in the first round, fifth, or was he a free agent? And why take a guy in the second round if you could let him slip to the fifth round and continue to build your team up? And I'll give you a prime example. I was in a draft many years ago, I think it was back in 1998, and Randy Moss was a rookie. Now at that point, a lot of people felt like he was going to be the number 3 guy in the depth chart behind Chris Carter, which is a Hall of Famer, and Jake Reed. Now Jake Reed, a lot of people forget him, but he had 4 seasons consecutively of 1,000 yards. And so when Randy Moss fell down the draft, he had some conduct issues, and it didn't look like he was going to immediately have a huge impact. Now, somebody in our draft took him in the first round, and he went on to have a great season, 17 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards. I mean, he was a stud that year. And so on the surface, that would seem like it was a good pick, but the reality was that wasn't a good pick, because if you understood where he was at in most drafts, that Vikings fan that took him in the first round could have probably got him in, a 4th, 5th, 6th round, maybe even later. And at that point, they could have built their team up. In fact, that was a good pick in terms of Randy Moss had a good year, but that team that took him, they had a horrible team. And I think part of it was they didn't have a good idea. Once again, you could have let him slip, build your team up. So once again, it's really important as you go into the draft to know the trends of where players are at and where you need to take them. So I'll start with my first overrated player. My first overrated player is going to be Antonio Brown. And so now this here's why I want to say he's overrated, not because of a lack of talent. I'll make this very clear. Antonio Brown is the #1 wideout out there. He's the best wideout. Okay, so it's not a lack of talent on his part. But what I've seen when I looked is his average draft position indicates some major draft philosophies out there in a lot of the leagues. Now, once again, these draft tendencies will change. We're early in August right here. Okay. But before I get into why I think that if people are making a mistake on Antonio Brown, I think we need to understand how the game's evolved with football. Since the 90s, the game has changed, and more teams are throwing the ball. And today's offenses can sustain greater wide receiver production. Okay. In fact, what we're seeing is that since 1994, I'll give you an example. 1994, 19 wide receivers hit 1,000 yards. And then you look at about 20 years later, and there's been almost an increase across the board year to year, about 33% increase in receivers that are now hitting 1,000 yards receiving. So once again, there's just more receivers being productive because the offenses are throwing the ball, they're spreading it out. And so once again, what that does, because there's more wide receiver production, it drives down the value based on supply of law and demand, or the law of supply and demand is driving down wide receiver values. There's just more wide receivers being productive out there. Now, during that same time, you've seen about a 33% increase in wide receiver production. You've almost subsequently seen a decrease in running back production in terms of running backs hitting 1,000 yards. So what that is wide receiver value is driven down, but to find a quality running back that's reliable, they're harder to find, so that drives up the value, okay? So Antonio Brown right now, average draft position is 3, okay? Here's where I have a problem with him. He should be number 4. Now that's only a change of 1 position in terms of draft, okay? But here's what that tells me. That tells me in all the leagues going on average, what's happening is that a lot of owners are drafting Brown, and either Johnson, Bell, or Ezekiel Elliott are still on the board, and that's a major mistake. Those guys should be the first 3 guys off of any draft board. They should be just gone right there. They should be the first 3. There's no way that Antonio Brown should be taken ahead of any of those backs. And so for me, that's why I think that Antonio Brown is overvalued. Once again, make sure you get those 3 studs. If they're out there, those running backs, you take them, and then you can move on to your wide receiver. Christian, how about your guy?
All right, so my first guy that I'm going to be talking about is Rob Gronkowski. According to ADP, he's the #1 tight end and the 19th overall pick in an average draft. Of course, that's not in every draft, but that's way too high. That makes him a mid-second round pick, and that is far too high for a few reasons. First of all, he's only played 56 games in the last 5 seasons, so you're basically only getting 11 games out of him. A mid-second round pick needs to play more than 11 games. You need him healthy when it counts as well. A mid-second round pick needs to be there for you if you're going to make playoffs and try to win it. So that's kind of the first thing, is just kind of, you should be able to trust the guy. You're taking him early. You can't afford to screw up this pick. It makes a big difference. Second is that there are multiple people that you could argue for being better than him. So why not wait? If you miss Gronkowski, it's not that big a deal. You can get Kelsey or Jordan Reed or Jimmy Graham. There's a lot of talent and there's a lot of depth at the tight end position this year. There might not be a 16 touchdown star like Gronk used to do, but that's just the thing. Gronk is not the same Gronk that we've seen before. Mid-second round pick is way too high, especially, as I said, with that depth. Finally, he's 28. He's not getting any healthier. In the last 5 seasons, he's averaged a little over 11 games a season. You're probably not getting 16 out of him. That's probably even his ceiling. He's not getting any younger. You know, he's not really old. He's 28. He's not 35. He's not 22 anymore. You've consistently seen these injuries from him. At 28, you've seen the Rob Gronkowski that we're going to get. And that's not a Rob Gronkowski in the last 5 years. That's worth a mid-second round pick. So that's kind of the philosophy. So basically for those first 2 ones, we're talking about, philosophy of taking running backs, not wideouts, and then, making sure if you're going to take a guy in the second round, he needs to be on the field playing for you all season. So who's your second guy?
Yeah, my second guy that I think is overrated is Todd Gurley. Okay, now this guy had an amazing rookie season. I had him in a keeper league last year, and then I dumped him, I traded him, I packaged him together. His average draft position right now is 21st. Okay, and they're taking him in the second round. And I say second round, what you're going to find is that when I talk about my comparisons for round estimation, I'm basing on a 12-team draft, a 12-team league. And so based on that, he'd be taken the second round. He's being taken ahead of players like Lamar Miller and Crowell. Now, if you want to know why I think that's a mistake, you'll have to see our other video, which is players we think are undervalued, and I'll tell you why you should take Lamar Miller ahead of Todd Gurley. Now, as far as Todd Gurley goes, he had a great rookie season, but last year his yards per carry dropped to a dismal 3.3. Now, here's my biggest concern. Nothing significant has really changed in the offseason besides the coach. But as far as offensive line, wide receivers, quarterbacks, that team is still a rebuilding mess. And so there's nothing I see that tells me he's going to rebound at this point. I certainly wouldn't take him in the second round at that place, especially with other talented backs and players that are out there on the board. Todd Gurley right now is overvalued. How about your next guy?
All right, so my next guy is Brandon Cooks. So according to ADP, he's the 13th ranked wide receiver and the 25th pick in the draft, which if you're in a 12-team league makes him the first pick in the third round. And I'll tell you why that's just too early. So first of all, ranked as a 13th wide receiver, last year the 13th ranked receiver caught 8 touchdowns. That's something the New England Patriots wide receiver hasn't done in 7 years. And I don't think that we're going to see that change, because there's a reason that New England wide receivers aren't huge yardage guys. They're not huge touchdown guys. It's been a long time since Randy Moss, basically, that we've seen a star New England receiver. And that's because Tom Brady spreads the ball out. He loves to throw the ball to tons of different people. In fact, in his career, Tom Brady has thrown to 63 different receivers. That is insanely high, far above average. So there's that. Additionally, there are too many weapons there. There aren't just that Tom Brady likes to spread the ball out. Even if he didn't want to, there's so much talent there that would go to waste if he didn't spread the ball out. And Rob Gronkowski, when he's healthy, though he's not always, Julian Edelman, who's a 1,000-yard receiver, Chris Hogan, Mike Gillislee, Dwayne Allen, White, Amendola, Mitchell. So there's just too many mouths to feed in that offense for him to be the first round or the first pick in the third round, for him to be ranked quite that highly. And finally, and most importantly, most of his stats last year came playing for the Saints, playing behind garbage time points, trying to catch up, throwing Hail Marys in the fourth quarter. That's when he found a lot of his yards and his touchdowns. And playing for the New England Patriots, it's just not going to happen that much this year. They're conservative, they play defense, they like to run the ball, and come the fourth quarter, they're in no urgency to score touchdowns. They're usually winning. So Brandon Cooks, too early to take him 25th overall. Who's your third guy, Rob?
Yeah, my third guy is, going back to New Orleans actually, is Michael Thompson, wide receiver of New Orleans. For me, I think he's overvalued. Currently, his average draft position is 13th, and according to my 12-team league scenario, he's the first pick in the second round, and here's why I think that's too early. One, he's taken ahead of players like J.J. Howard, Gronk, DeMarco Murray. You know, a lot of talent there for a guy who had a great season. I think he's very talented, has a bright future, but he's still just a second-year wideout, okay? And this is going to be the first year he's going to be expected to be the number one guy, and we'll see how he does when he starts to line up against number one corners, when teams start to maybe slide a safety over to cover him. And so he's just a second year once again, wideout, very talented, but first pick in the second round, when there's other good running backs out there, I think this pick is a stretch. Don't take Michael Thomas this early in your draft. Right now, he's being overvalued. Your final guy?
All right, so my final guy is Ty Montgomery. So he's ranked as the 16th scoring running back according to ADP, and 37th overall off the board, making him a mid-third round pick, or early fourth round pick, I should say. And here's why that's too early. At this point in the draft, whoever you're drafting is a starter for you. And Ty Montgomery should not be your starting running back. He shouldn't crack your starting lineup, and here's why. First of all, he's more of a wide receiver than he is a running back. He only got 77 carries last year, which for me, I don't want any running back who only gets 77 carries. In addition, I always hear this argument that people are like, wow, he's so good in the pass game. He catches so many balls. He's so great. You have to be extremely impressive for that to be enough for me, and he's just not there. He only got 44 catches and 0 touchdowns last year. That's a very unimpressive game. Additionally, the Green Bay Packers, they don't want a running back. They're perfectly content throwing the ball all day long, and he's just not going to get that volume. Finally, here's the other thing. There's just so much talent at this point in the draft. Why would I skip on Alshon Jeffrey, Jordan Reed, Landry, and Diggs, all players whose average ADP have them taking after Ty Montgomery? I'm sorry, but I want a solid, good running back if I'm going to take him that early in the draft. And if I'm not going to get him, I'm going to go out and get one of those talented wide receivers or tight ends. I don't know what you think about that, Rob, but I just think it's way too high for a running back that's only not even getting 100 carries a season.
Yeah, one of the things I would say, you talk about Ty Montgomery, and certainly if you're in a PPR, you could bump him up. We're giving you guys that we think are over and undervalued, and all these things are based on limited information on our part. Obviously, when you look at drafting, one thing you need to consider is your scoring system, your league rules, things like that. So we're giving you some just basic guidelines. Once again, to recap, my three guys overvalued are Antonio Brown, very talented, but make sure those three running backs are off the board. Number 2, Todd Gurley, overvalued. Number 3 is Michael Thomas. Just recap your guys again.
Yeah, so Rob Gronkowski, number 1, number 2, Brandon Cooks, and number 3, Ty Montgomery. Those are my 3 guys that will be taken far too early. As always, we thank you guys so much for watching. You have a great day, and God bless.